The metal lay on the sterile hospital floor, spattered with blood, Jimmy Winter's blood. The fluorescent lights caught its tarnished surface as monitors screamed their electronic warnings. 68-year-old fingers, gnarled like ancient oak roots, stretched toward it, trembling. "Some wounds take 50 years to bleed out," Jimmy whispered, his voice sandpaper rough as the room blurred around him. Doctors shouted orders. Nurses rushed with gauze and saline. But Jimmy's focus remained fixed on that small piece of metal, not the one they'd just extracted from his shoulder, but the one that had fallen from the doctor's clipboard, a yellowed photo of a military decoration he'd never received. His vision tunneled. The hospital dissolved into jungle heat, explosions, screams of young men. The steady beep of the heart monitor transformed into incoming mortar fire at Khe-Sanh. "We're losing him," someone called, but Jimmy Winters had been lost for decades. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. James Jimmy Winters hadn't always been the town pariah. There was a time, before Vietnam, before the jungle and the blood and the screams, when he'd been Millfield High's star quarterback with a cannon for an arm and scouts watching from the bleachers, that Jimmy Winters died somewhere in the mud of Khe-Sanh in 1968. The man who returned to Indiana was merely the vessel that carried his ghost. Home to just under 5,000 souls, Millfield, Indiana, hadn't changed much since Jimmy shipped out. The same families owned the same businesses, attended the same churches, and gossiped over the same fences. What had changed was how they looked at him. The paralyzed right arm, once capable of 60-yard passes, now hung uselessly at his side, a perpetual reminder of what had been taken. The townsfolk averted their eyes when he passed, as if his wounds might somehow be contagious. Jimmy lived in a decrepit trailer at the edge of town, where the train tracks separated the good neighborhoods from everything else. His morning ritual never varied. Black coffee at Millie's Diner, sitting alone at the corner table where he could keep his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, old habits that wouldn't die. "Usual, Jimmy?" Millie would ask, already pouring the coffee. "Yes, ma'am," he'd reply, his voice perpetually hoarse from shrapnel that had damaged his vocal cords decades ago. The other patrons would shift uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with Crazy Jimmy, the man who sometimes spoke to people who weren't there, who flinched at car backfires, who once dove under a table during a thunderstorm, screaming about incoming mortars. After coffee came the aluminum can collection, pushing his old shopping cart with his good arm, combing through public trash bins for recyclables that brought in just enough to supplement his meager VA benefits. Just enough to survive, never enough to live. Jimmy's weathered face had aged well beyond his years, deep lines etched by jungle sun and sleepless nights, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, remained unchanged, holding the same intensity that had once made him the pride of Millfield. Those eyes had seen things the good people of this town couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. He kept to himself, spoke only when necessary, and maintained his military bearing despite the disability. Back straight, chin up, left arm ready for a salute that no one would return. Pride was all he had left. Pride and the nightmares that visited him nightly, replaying the worst moments of his life in vivid, merciless detail. Every morning he awoke believing that today might be different. Today someone might look him in the eye. Today someone might remember that he had once been somebody. Today someone might care. Every night he went to bed knowing better. The Tuesday morning dawned gray and sullen, with heavy clouds promising rain that hadn't yet found the courage to fall. Jimmy stood at the downtown bus stop, not because he needed to catch a bus, he had nowhere to go, but because the small shelter offered respite from the biting wind that cut through his thin jacket. His collection cart, already half full of aluminum cans, waited beside him like a faithful companion. Main Street was quieter than usual. The recession had hit Millfield hard, leaving empty storefronts where family businesses had once thrived. Jimmy watched the occasional car pass, noting how the drivers carefully avoided looking in his direction. After all these years, it still stung. He checked his watch, an old Timex, scratched and battered but still ticking after nearly 50 years. Just like him. It was almost noon, which meant Officer Ashley Reeves would be making her patrol rounds soon. Jimmy didn't know her name, but he recognized the young blonde police officer who, unlike most of the town, actually nodded to him when she passed. Small kindnesses meant everything when you were invisible. As if summoned by his thoughts, the police cruiser appeared at the far end of Main Street, moving slowly past the hardware store and the shuttered movie theater. Jimmy straightened instinctively, his left hand brushing imaginary wrinkles from his worn jeans. Old habits from another lifetime. Officer Ashley Reeves was 32, though her youthful features made her look younger, a fact that had caused more than one suspect to underestimate her. 6 years on the force had taught her to read a street like others read a book. Something felt off today. The usual Tuesday rhythms were disrupted by an undercurrent of tension she couldn't quite place. She slowed the cruiser as she approached the bus stop, noticing the old veteran, the one some of the officers mockingly called Sergeant Shakes because of his trembling left hand. Ashley never used that name. Her father had died in Vietnam before she was born, and she'd been raised on stories of his bravery. Every veteran deserved respect, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones. She was about to offer her usual nod when movement across the street caught her attention. A tall, gaunt man in a stained hoodie was pacing erratically outside the pharmacy, hands jammed in his pockets, eyes darting nervously. Marcus Doyle, local junkie, occasional dealer, and frequent flyer in the county jail. He seemed more agitated than usual. Ashley parked the cruiser and stepped out, one hand resting casually near her holster. "Morning, Mr. Winters," she called to Jimmy, keeping Marcus in her peripheral vision. Jimmy nodded, surprised at being addressed by name. Few people bothered to remember it anymore. "Everything okay today?" she asked, though her attention was divided. "Yes, ma'am," Jimmy replied, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Might rain, though." Ashley smiled and started across the street toward Marcus, who had now begun arguing with his own reflection in the pharmacy window. Standard procedure. Assess, engage, de-escalate if necessary. Jimmy watched her go, admiring her professional demeanor. She reminded him of Mary Callahan, the combat nurse who'd saved his life at Khe Sanh. Same blonde hair, same determined set to her jaw. Mary had died 2 days after patching Jimmy up, when a mortar hit the medical tent. He sometimes wondered if he'd been worth the sacrifice. The change in Marcus was subtle but immediate, a straightening of posture, a focusing of previously scattered attention. Jimmy recognized it instantly, the predator's shift before attack. 20 meters away, Officer Reeves was still approaching, unaware of the danger signals Jimmy had been trained to spot. "Officer," Jimmy called out, his damaged voice barely carrying over the wind. Marcus's hand emerged from his pocket, clutching a hunting knife with a 6-inch blade. His eyes, vacant yet somehow calculating, fixed on Ashley as she reached for her radio. Jimmy moved before conscious thought could intervene. Decades melted away as muscle memory took over. The same instinct that had kept him alive through 11 months in Vietnam's jungle hell. He abandoned his cart and crossed the distance in seconds, his right arm hanging uselessly but his left arm and legs remembering their purpose. Ashley saw the knife too late. Marcus lunged forward with surprising speed, the blade arcing toward her throat. She managed to deflect his wrist, but the momentum carried them both off balance. "Drop it! Police!" she shouted, reaching for her weapon. Marcus was beyond hearing. His eyes were wild, pupils contracted to pinpoints, high on something that had disconnected him from reality and consequence. The knife came around for a second strike. It never landed. Jimmy slammed into Marcus from the side, throwing his body between the attacker and Officer Reeves. He felt a sharp, familiar pain as the knife found his left shoulder instead of Ashley's chest. "No!" Ashley cried out, drawing her weapon as Jimmy and Marcus tumbled to the wet pavement. The impact knocked the knife from Marcus's hand. Jimmy, despite his age and disability, managed to pin the younger man with the weight of his body, using his functioning left arm to hold Marcus's wrist. "Stand down, son," Jimmy gasped, blood spreading across his faded denim jacket. "Stand down." Something in Jimmy's tone, the unmistakable command of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations, penetrated Marcus's drug-addled brain. He stopped struggling. Ashley secured Marcus with handcuffs, then rushed to Jimmy's side. Blood pulsed steadily from the wound in his shoulder, alarmingly bright against the gray day. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reeves. I need an ambulance at Main and Elm immediately. Civilian down with stab wound to the shoulder. Suspect in custody." Jimmy tried to stand but found his strength suddenly departed. The world tilted sideways as he slumped against the bus stop bench. "Stay with me, Mr. Winters," Ashley said, pressing her jacket against his wound. "Help is coming." Jimmy nodded weakly. The pain was familiar, an old friend returning after a long absence. His vision blurred, but not from blood loss. In his mind's eye, he was back in the jungle, hearing the whistle of incoming mortars, feeling the earth shake beneath him. "Mary," he whispered. "I'm Ashley, Mr. Winters. Officer Reeves. You're going to be okay." Jimmy blinked, reality reasserting itself. "Sorry, ma'am." "You remind me of someone." A small crowd had gathered, keeping a safe distance. Jimmy heard their whispers. "Isn't that crazy, Jimmy?" "What happened? Did he attack someone?" "No, looks like he helped the officer." "Crazy Jimmy did that?" Even in crisis, he remained Crazy Jimmy, not James Winters, not Sergeant Winters who had once led men in battle, just the town eccentric who had finally done something worth noticing. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens wailing. As the paramedics loaded Jimmy onto a stretcher, Ashley leaned close. "You saved my life, Mr. Winters. I won't forget that." Jimmy tried to smile, but the pain was intensifying. "Just doing my duty, ma'am." As they wheeled him into the ambulance, Jimmy caught fragments of conversation from the gathering crowd. "Did you see that? Old man moved pretty fast for a cripple. Think he'll be okay? Who cares? It's just Crazy Jimmy." The ambulance doors closed on their voices, and Jimmy surrendered to the darkness that had been waiting for him since Quezon. The fluorescent lights of County General Hospital buzzed overhead like angry hornets, casting everyone in the emergency room in the same sickly pallor. Dr. Daniel Roberts, 48 hours into what should have been a 36-hour shift, rubbed his bloodshot eyes as he examined the wound on Jimmy Winters' shoulder. "You're lucky, Mr. Winters. The blade missed any major arteries or tendons. Looks like it hit mostly muscle tissue." Dr. Roberts probed gently around the wound. "Though we'll need to clean this thoroughly. When was your last tetanus shot?" Jimmy stared at the ceiling, his face impassive. 1968. Army gave it to me before I shipped out." Dr. Roberts raised an eyebrow. "Well, you're definitely due for another one." As the doctor continued his examination, his fingers encountered something unexpected. A hard mass beneath the skin, several inches away from the fresh wound. "Mr. Winters, do you have any shrapnel or previous injuries in this area?" Jimmy nodded slightly. "Caught some metal at Quezon. Doctors got what they could, but some pieces were too deep. Said they wouldn't cause problems." Dr. Roberts frowned, pressing more firmly on the area. The tissue surrounding the mass felt warm, inflamed. "Has this area been painful recently? Any swelling or discharge?" "Everything hurts at my age, Doc. Didn't notice anything special. The doctor reached for an ultrasound wand. Let me take a closer look. The image on the screen showed a distinct foreign object, approximately 2 inches long and jagged at one end, surrounded by what appeared to be an encapsulated infection. Mr. Winters, it looks like you've got a fragment that's been in there for quite some time and it's developed an infection. The fresh trauma may have disturbed it. We'll need to do some x-rays and possibly remove it surgically. Jimmy closed his eyes briefly. Do what you need to, Doc. 2 hours later, Jimmy lay on an operating table under local anesthesia. The surgical team had decided that the fragment needed immediate removal due to signs of a worsening infection that could potentially lead to sepsis. All right, Mr. Winters, you'll feel some pressure but no pain, Dr. Roberts explained as he made the incision. Let us know if anything changes. The procedure progressed smoothly until Dr. Roberts finally reached the embedded object. His expression changed as he carefully extracted a jagged metal fragment. Would you look at that? He murmured, holding it up to the light. Nurse, can you put this in a specimen container? Mr. Winters might want to keep it. The fragment was unlike typical shrapnel. It had distinctive markings and a unique shape that suggested it came from a specific type of ordnance, a cluster bomb, the kind that had rained down on Quezon during the siege. Mr. Winters, Dr. Robert said, his voice filled with disbelief. This has been in your body for over 50 years. Jimmy's voice was flat. 57 years, 2 months and 16 days. But who's counting? The infection around the fragment had created a protective capsule of scar tissue, which had likely prevented the metal from causing more damage over the decades. But the recent trauma had disrupted this fragile balance, allowing bacteria to flourish. As the surgical team closed the wound, a nurse entered the operating room. Dr. Roberts, there's a police officer waiting outside. She wants an update on Mr. Winters' condition. Tell her he's stable and the procedure went well. We've removed both the knife wound and an old piece of shrapnel that was causing an infection. He'll need to stay for observation and antibiotics. After surgery, Jimmy was moved to a recovery room. The anesthesia was wearing off, leaving him groggy but alert enough to register someone entering his room. Officer Ashley Reeves stood in the doorway, still in uniform but without her utility belt. Mr. Winters, the doctor said I could see you briefly. She stepped inside, her expression a mixture of concern and gratitude. How are you feeling? Jimmy attempted a smile that came out more like a grimace. Been worse. Ashley pulled a chair close to his bed. I wanted to thank you personally. What you did today. You risked your life for me. Just instinct, ma'am. Anyone would have done the same. She shook her head firmly. No, they wouldn't have. I saw people freeze. I saw people back away. You were the only one who moved toward danger. Jimmy looked away, uncomfortable with praise. How's the kid with the knife? Marcus? He's in custody. Looks like he was high on synthetic drugs. He doesn't even remember attacking me. Ashley hesitated. The doctors found something when they were treating you. Something from Vietnam? Jimmy nodded slightly. Souvenir from Quezon. Been carrying it around longer than you've been alive. Before Ashley could respond, there was another knock at the door. A woman in her early 30s with a press badge stepped into the room. Excuse me, I'm Sarah Williams from the Millfield Gazette. I heard about what happened downtown. Would either of you care to comment on today's events? Ashley stood up protectively. This isn't a good time. Mr. Winters just got out of surgery. The reporter persisted. I understand, but this is quite a story. Local veteran becomes hero. Not a hero, Jimmy interrupted, his voice stronger than before. Just did what needed doing. Sarah Williams stepped closer, her reporter's instinct sensing a deeper story. Mr. Winters, I understand they found war shrapnel in your shoulder during surgery. From Vietnam? Jimmy's eyes narrowed. Who told you that? Small towns, Mr. Winters. Word travels fast. She pulled out a small recorder. Would you mind telling me about your service? Were you wounded in action, decorated? Ashley intervened. Miss Williams, I must insist. It's all right, officer. Jimmy shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. Not much to tell, ma'am. Served with the 26th Marines at Quezon. Got hit during a night patrol. Nothing special about it. But you carried that shrapnel for over 50 years, the reporter pressed. And today you risked your life to save Officer Reeves. That sounds pretty special to me. Jimmy's weathered face remained impassive. A lot of men did a lot more and never came home. They're the special ones. As the reporter continued asking questions, Dr. Roberts returned with a small plastic container. Mr. Winters, I thought you might want to keep this. Not every day we extract a 57-year-old piece of history from someone. The container held the metal fragment, now cleaned of blood and tissue. In the sterile hospital light, its edges gleamed dully. A small, jagged piece of metal that had traveled from a Vietnamese battlefield to a small town in Indiana. Sarah Williams's eyes widened. May I see that? Take a photo, perhaps? Before anyone could respond, a nurse rushed in. Dr. Roberts, Mr. Winters' blood pressure is dropping and his fever's spiking to 103. The doctor immediately checked the monitors. We need to start him on stronger antibiotics. That infection may have spread before we remove the fragment. He turned to Ashley and the reporter. I'm sorry, but you'll need to leave now. As they were ushered out, Jimmy's consciousness began to fade. The metal fragment in its plastic container sat on the bedside table, a small, tangible piece of his past that had finally emerged into the light after decades of darkness. By morning, word of Jimmy's actions had spread throughout Millfield. The Gazette ran a front-page story. Local Vietnam veteran saves officer, carries battlefield inside him for decades. The article included a photo of the extracted shrapnel and a blurry image of Jimmy being loaded into the ambulance. But alongside the story of heroism, rumors began to circulate. An anonymous online comment claimed that Jimmy had been investigated for abandoning fellow soldiers during the war. Another suggested his disability was exaggerated for benefits. Without any public record to counter these claims, the whispers grew. In his hospital bed, fighting infection and fever, Jimmy Winters remained unaware that his past and present were colliding in ways that would soon force the town of Millfield and Jimmy himself to confront long-buried truths. The Millfield Public Library maintained a small, poorly funded archive room in its basement where decades of local newspapers, town records, and high school yearbooks gathered dust in metal filing cabinets. Officer Ashley Reeves had never had reason to visit this musty repository until now, 3 days after Jimmy Winters had saved her life. Ashley moved carefully through the narrow aisles, flashlight in hand, the overhead fluorescent bulbs having long since flickered into permanent darkness. Her shift had ended 2 hours ago, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the knife, felt the rush of air as it sliced toward her, and then the surprising strength of an old man's body pushing her to safety. She found the cabinet labeled 1960 to 1969 and pulled open the creaking drawer. Millfield High School yearbooks were stacked chronologically. She withdrew the 1967 edition, Jimmy's senior year if her calculations were correct. There he was, on page 37, James Winters, football team captain, his young face unlined by time and trauma, eyes bright with promise. She traced her finger over the black and white photo, the quarterback with the cannon arm, the boy who would return from war a broken man. Finding anything interesting, Officer Reeves? Ashley startled, nearly dropping the yearbook. Library Director Eleanor Simmons stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Ms. Simmons, I didn't realize anyone was still here. Security system alerts me when someone enters after hours. Even police officers should call ahead. Eleanor's stern expression softened slightly. Though given recent events, I understand your interest in our local hero. Ashley closed the yearbook. I'm trying to understand who he was before Vietnam changed him. Eleanor sighed, uncrossing her arms. I was a freshman when Jimmy was a senior. Every girl in school had a crush on him. She stepped into the room. He was headed to Notre Dame on a football scholarship. Then the draft got him. Did you know him when he came back? Not really. He wasn't the same person. Eleanor hesitated. Nobody knew how to talk to the boys who came back, especially the ones who came back different. Ashley returned the yearbook to its drawer. I'd like to know more about his service record. He mentioned Quezon. You might want to speak with Harold Gentry at the VFW. If anyone knows about our local veterans, it's him. Eleanor checked her watch. But that will have to wait until morning. I need to lock up now. The following day, Ashley found herself at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 7233, a modest building on the outskirts of town with a flagpole out front and a hand-painted sign welcoming veterans of all eras. Inside, the walls were covered with photos, medals, and memorabilia, a shrine to the town's military history. Harold Gentry, 75, post commander and Vietnam veteran himself, sat across from Ashley at the bar, nursing a cup of black coffee. His arthritic hands curled around the mug like gnarled tree roots. Jimmy Winters, Harold said, nodding slowly. Haven't seen him in here for years. Not since the incident. What incident? Ashley leaned forward. Christmas party, 1982. Someone made a joke about baby killers. Jimmy put him through a window. Harold sipped his coffee. Can't say I blamed him, but the post had rules. He never came back after the suspension was lifted. What can you tell me about his service? He mentioned Quezon. Harold's eyes took on a distant look. Quezon was hell on earth. 77 days under siege. Marines trapped on a hilltop surrounded by NVA. Constant shelling. Jimmy was with the 26th Marines. Was he decorated? Rumor was he was put in for something big. Medal of Honor, some said, but nothing ever came of it. Harold shrugged. A lot of paperwork got lost in the chaos back then, especially during Tet. Ashley made notes in her small notebook. Is there anyone still around who served with him? Not in Millfield. Most of the boys from here who went to Nam either didn't come back or moved away after. Harold scratched his beard thoughtfully. Though I heard Jimmy's lieutenant, Prescott I think, settled somewhere in Michigan after the war. As Ashley was about to ask another question, the door to the VFW swung open and 3 older men entered. They paused when they saw Ashley. Speaking of our local celebrity, one of them said loudly. Officer Reeves, I hear you're leading the Jimmy Winters fan club now. Harold frowned. Show some respect, Frank. The man saved her life. Frank Reynolds, owner of Reynolds Hardware and town council member, pulled up a stool. Just saying what everyone's thinking, one good deed doesn't erase a lifetime of being the town weirdo. Ashley's back stiffened. Mr. Winters is a decorated combat veteran who... Decorated? Frank interrupted with a harsh laugh. Is that what he told you? Because from what I hear, there are serious questions about his conduct in Vietnam. What are you talking about? Ashley demanded. Frank pulled out his phone and opened a web browser. There's a blog post going viral. Guy claims his father served with Winters at Quezon, says Jimmy abandoned wounded men to save himself. He pushed the phone toward Ashley. Pretty detailed account. Ashley scrolled through the post on a site called Truth About Vietnam Heroes. The article, written by someone named Michael Turner, contained specific allegations about a night patrol gone wrong and Jimmy's alleged desertion under fire. This is just an anonymous blog post, Ashley said, pushing the phone back. Not exactly a reliable source. Michael Turner isn't anonymous, Frank countered. He's a history professor at State. His father died at Quai Sange. He's been researching this for years. Harold cleared his throat. Frank, you know as well as I do that war stories get twisted, especially from that mess. All I'm saying, Frank continued, is maybe the town should wait before naming a street after Crazy Jimmy, at least until we know the whole truth. After leaving the VFW, Ashley drove directly to the hospital. Jimmy had been moved to a regular room, his condition stabilized after a worrying first night. When she entered, he was staring out the window, his paralyzed right arm resting uselessly across his lap. "Officer Reeves," he acknowledged without turning. "Didn't expect to see you again." Ashley sat in the visitor's chair. "How are you feeling, Mr. Winters?" "Doctors say the infection's under control. Should be out in a few days." He finally looked at her. "You didn't come to check on my health, though." "No," she admitted. "I've been doing some research about you." "About Quai. Jimmy's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Why?" "Because the town's talking. There's a blog post making serious allegations about your service." She hesitated. "About a night patrol where men died." Jimmy was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "February 25th, 1968. Hill 471. I remember every second." "What happened?" "We were sent to ambush an NVA supply column. 16 of us. Lieutenant Prescott led the patrol." Jimmy's gaze returned to the window. "We were the ones who got ambushed instead. The blog claims you abandoned wounded men." A muscle in Jimmy's jaw twitched. "Who wrote it?" "Michael Turner. He says his father died there." "Corporal David Turner," Jimmy nodded. "He was our radio man." "Did you leave him behind?" Jimmy's eyes, when they met hers, contained a depth of pain that made Ashley want to look away. "I carried David Turner on my back for 2 miles with a piece of metal in my shoulder and mortar rounds falling all around us. He died in my arms as dawn broke over the hills." Jimmy's left hand clenched into a fist. "I didn't leave anyone who could be saved." Before Ashley could respond, a nurse entered with medication. "Time for your antibiotics, Mr. Winters. And you have another visitor." Sarah Williams from the Millfield Gazette stood in the doorway, notebook in hand. "Officer Reeves, Mr. Winters, I hope I'm not interrupting." Ashley stood. "Actually, we were in the middle of—" "It's fine," Jimmy interrupted. "Officer Reeves was just leaving." Ashley reluctantly gathered her things. "I'll come back tomorrow, Mr. Winters. We should finish our conversation." As she left, she heard Sarah asking Jimmy about the blog post, which had apparently gained significant traction online. The story was growing beyond Millfield's borders. That evening, Ashley sat in her small apartment, laptop open to Michael Turner's blog. The comment section had exploded with both support and condemnation for Jimmy Winters. Veterans argued with each other about the realities of combat and the fog of war. Civilians who had never heard a shot fired in anger confidently passed judgment. Ashley dug deeper into Michael Turner's background. He was indeed a history professor specializing in Vietnam War studies. His father, David Turner, had died at Quai San, leaving behind a pregnant wife. Michael had been born 3 months after his father's death. On impulse, Ashley sent an email to Turner's university address, identifying herself as the police officer Jimmy Winters had saved and requesting a conversation about his blog post. Within minutes, her phone rang. "Officer Reeves, this is Michael Turner. I got your email." His voice was younger than she'd expected, though tinged with the academic precision of a longtime professor. "Thank you for calling back so quickly," Ashley said. "I wanted to discuss your post about James Winters." "I assume you're calling to defend him," Turner said, a defensive edge in his voice. "Given that he saved your life." I'm calling to understand the truth. Your post makes serious allegations. They're not allegations, Officer Reeves. They're facts based on extensive research and interviews with survivors. Have you spoken with Mr. Winters directly? A pause. No. I've tried to contact him over the years, but he's never responded. Maybe you should before publishing accusations that could destroy what little peace he has left. Turner's voice hardened. My father died because James Winters broke under pressure. He was supposed to call in air support. He had the radio after my father was hit, but he panicked and ran instead. 9 men died that night. That's not what Mr. Winters told me, Ashley countered. He says he carried your father for miles. Of course he'd say that. He's had 50 years to craft his story, Turner sighed. Look, I don't expect you to understand. You see him as the hero who saved you. I see him as the coward who let my father die. Will you at least meet with him? Hear his side directly? Another long pause. I'm giving a lecture at Millfield Community College next week on the forgotten battles of Vietnam. Ironically enough, I suppose I could make time? After hanging up, Ashley stared at her laptop screen. The truth of what happened on that jungle hillside 57 years ago seemed both vitally important and impossibly distant. How could anyone know with certainty what occurred in the chaos of an ambush, in the darkness, with young men dying and explosions lighting the night? Meanwhile, across town, a meeting of the Millfield Town Council was underway. Frank Reynolds stood before his colleagues, expressing grave concerns about the proposal to honor Jimmy Winters with a special ceremony. In light of serious questions about his war record, I move that we postpone any recognition until a thorough investigation can be conducted, Frank concluded. The motion passed unanimously. The town of Millfield, which had ignored Jimmy Winters for decades, was now intensely interested in the truth about him. A truth buried beneath layers of trauma, time, and the unreliable nature of memory itself. At County General, Jimmy lay awake, watching shadows move across the ceiling. The fragment that had rested inside him for so long was gone, but its absence created a different kind of void, as if the last physical connection to who he had once been had been severed. Outside his room, nurses whispered about the blog post, unaware that his hearing, unlike his right arm, still functioned perfectly. The past, it seemed, was not content to remain buried any longer. The community college auditorium was half-filled, mostly with students fulfilling history requirements and a smattering of Vietnam veterans wearing faded caps emblazoned with unit insignias. Professor Michael Turner stood at the podium, his PowerPoint presentation showing a grainy black-and-white photo of Khe Sanh Combat Base circa 1968, a scarred hilltop surrounded by bomb craters. What we often forget about Khe Sanh, Turner was saying, is that while the 77-day siege captured headlines, some of the most intense fighting happened on the hills and valleys surrounding the main base. From the back row, Ashley Reeves watched Turner carefully. He was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the very image of an academic. She had arranged this meeting without telling Jimmy, unsure if he would agree to face his accuser. On February 25, 1968, a 16-man patrol was ambushed on Hill 471, Turner continued, clicking to a topographical map. 9 men died, including my father, Corporal David Turner. The door at the rear of the auditorium opened. Heads turned as Jimmy Winters entered, leaning heavily on a cane, a concession to his recent surgery. He wore a clean but threadbare button-down shirt and his only pair of dress pants. Despite his obvious discomfort, he stood ramrod straight, his military bearing evident even after all these years. Turner faltered mid-sentence as he recognized the old man. A murmur ran through the audience. "I believe that's James Winters," someone whispered loudly. "The guy from the blog post." Turner cleared his throat. "As I was saying, 9 men died that night. The survivors made it back with conflicting accounts of what happened. His eyes locked with Jimmy's across the room, some accounts more conflicting than others. Ashley moved to Jimmy's side, offering support he did not accept. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. Jimmy nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes never leaving Turner. Turner wrapped up his lecture quickly, fielding a few perfunctory questions before the audience dispersed. Most lingered, however, sensing the tension between the professor and the old veteran. "Mr. Winters," Turner acknowledged as Jimmy approached the podium. "I didn't expect to see you here. Figured it was time we talked," Jimmy replied, his raspy voice carrying in the now quiet auditorium. "Your blog post has people looking at me sideways, more than usual." Turner removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief, a delaying tactic as he collected his thoughts. "I've spent my entire adult life researching what happened that night. I have sworn statements from survivors that contradict your version of events." "Which survivors?" Jimmy asked quietly. "Sergeant Phillips, Corporal Hernandez. They both stated that after Lieutenant Prescott was killed, you froze. That when my father was hit, you took his radio but failed to call in support." Jimmy's left hand tightened on his cane. "Phillips died in 1986. Liver failure. Hernandez in 2005. Heart attack. Convenient that all your witnesses are dead." "I interviewed them before they passed," Turner countered. "I have recordings." "I'm sure you do," Jimmy acknowledged. "Did they also tell you they were 100 yards away when your father was hit? That we got separated when the mortar started falling?" A vein pulsed in Turner's temple. "They told me you were supposed to be with him. That you were his fire team partner." "I was," Jimmy nodded. "And I tried to reach him when the first rounds hit, but the lieutenant ordered me to secure our left flank." His voice remained steady, but Ashley could see the cost of this conversation in the whiteness of his knuckles. "By the time I got back to your father's position, he'd taken shrapnel to the chest and leg." Turner stepped out from behind the podium, closing the distance between them. "And then you took his radio and ran." The few remaining audience members had formed a loose circle around the two men. Ashley stood close, ready to intervene if necessary, though this confrontation had been inevitable for decades. "No, son. I took his radio to call in medevac, but it was damaged in the attack. Then I carried your father because he couldn't walk." Jimmy's voice dropped lower. "He weighed 190 pounds. I was 160, soaking wet. But I carried him." "That's not what the others said." "The others weren't there. They were fighting to reach the extraction point. Your father and I got cut off." Turner's academic composure cracked. "My mother cried herself to sleep every night for years." "I grew up without a father because you failed to do your duty." Jimmy didn't flinch. "Your father was my friend. We played cards the night before the patrol. He showed me your mother's picture, told me she was pregnant." His left hand reached into his shirt pocket, withdrawing a worn, plastic-covered photo. "He gave me this to hold for him. Said it was bad luck to carry pictures on patrol." Turner stared at the faded photograph of his mother, visibly pregnant, standing in front of a small house. "I tried to give it back to her after I got home," Jimmy continued. "She wouldn't see me. Said I should have died instead of him." "You expect me to believe this? After all this time?" Turner's voice had risen, drawing more attention from people passing in the hallway outside. "I don't expect anything from you," Jimmy replied. "But I'll tell you what happened that night, whether you believe it or not." Jimmy shifted his weight, grimacing slightly at the pain in his healing shoulder. "The ambush hit us from 3 sides. Lieutenant Prescott took a headshot in the first minute. Sergeant Wilkins tried to organize a defense, but they had us zeroed. Mortars started falling." His eyes took on the 1,000-yard stare familiar to combat veterans. "Your father was calling for air support when he was hit. Shrapnel tore through the radio first, then into him." Turner's hands had balled into fists, but he remained silent. "I dragged him behind a boulder. applied pressure bandages, gave him morphine from my kit. He was conscious, talking about you and your mother. Jimmy's voice cracked slightly. The others had to fall back to the extraction point. They couldn't reach us. Your father told me to go with them, but I wouldn't leave him. Then how did you both get separated from the unit? Turner demanded. NVA troops were moving to flank us. If we stayed put, we'd be overrun. I got your father on my back and headed east, hoping to circle around and reach the LZ. Jimmy closed his eyes briefly. We moved through the night. Each time I put him down to rest, it got harder to lift him again. He was bleeding out despite the bandages. The auditorium had grown completely silent. Even those who had initially appeared skeptical were now listening intently. Dawn was breaking when he died. We were maybe half a mile from the extraction point. I could hear the helicopters. Jimmy's hand trembled slightly. His last words were about you. He said, "Tell my son I did my duty." Then he was gone. Turner shook his head. If that's true, why didn't you bring his body back? I tried, Jimmy said simply. But I'd been hit too, though I didn't realize how bad until later. Lost a lot of blood. When I finally reached our lines, I collapsed. By the time I regained consciousness, they'd already sent out recovery teams. They found your father where I'd left him, covered him with my jacket. That's convenient, Turner said bitterly. A story no one can verify. From the edge of the group, an elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap stepped forward. Actually, someone can. All eyes turned to the newcomer. He was short and wiry, with a white mustache and deeply tanned face. Name's Robert Martinez. I was a door gunner on the medevac that picked up the survivors of that patrol. The man nodded respectfully to Jimmy. I remember this one. He was half dead when they brought him aboard, babbling about a man he had to go back for. Turner's eyes narrowed. You could be anyone. How do I know you're telling the truth? Martinez reached into his wallet and produced a tattered military ID. 20 years in the Marines, son. I don't lie about what happened over there. He turned to Jimmy. Never knew your name, but I recognized your picture in the paper. You're the one they called Last Man Jimmy after that patrol, right? Jimmy nodded slowly. Some did, not for long. Martinez addressed Turner again. Recovery team found a dead Marine covered with a jacket, dog tags already removed. Someone had placed his hands across his chest, put his helmet over his face. That's not abandonment, Professor. That's what we did for our brothers when we couldn't bring them home. Turner's academic certainty seemed to waver. If what you're saying is true, why hasn't this come out before? Why isn't it in the official record? Because the official record is what some rear echelon officer wrote after interviewing shell-shocked kids who'd just seen their friends die, Martinez replied. I've seen enough combat to know that everybody experiences the same firefight differently, especially at night, especially under heavy fire. Ashley watched Jimmy carefully during this exchange. His face remained impassive, but she could see the toll this was taking in the slight tremor of his hand, the beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the auditorium. Mr. Winters needs to sit down, she announced, moving to his side. This conversation can continue after he rests. I'm fine, Jimmy protested, but his complexion had taken on an alarming grayish tinge. You're not fine, Ashley insisted. You're 1 week post-surgery and running a fever again. Turner watched this interaction with conflicted emotions playing across his face. The righteous anger that had fueled him for years was colliding with doubt. We can continue this later, he finally conceded. I have questions I need to consider. As Ashley helped Jimmy to a chair, the remaining audience members began to disperse, whispering among themselves. The confrontation had not provided the dramatic resolution some had hoped for, but had instead opened new questions about memory, truth, and the fog of war. Martinez approached Jimmy, extending his hand. "Never thought I'd see you again, Marine." Jimmy clasped the offered hand with his functioning left one. "Thank you for speaking up." "Truth matters," Martinez said simply, "especially about over there." He glanced at Turner, who was gathering his presentation materials with jerky, distracted movements. "He spent his whole life believing one story. Won't change his mind in one day." "I don't expect him to," Jimmy replied. "But I've carried the truth long enough. Figured it was time to set it down, like that shrapnel in my shoulder." After Martinez left, Ashley knelt beside Jimmy's chair. "We need to get you back to the hospital. You're pushing yourself too hard." Jimmy shook his head stubbornly. "Been pushed harder. Besides, I'm not done here." His eyes tracked Turner, who was now alone at the podium, staring at nothing. "He deserves to know everything." "It can wait until you're stronger," Ashley insisted. "No," Jimmy said firmly. "Some things have waited too long already." With effort, he pushed himself to his feet and made his way back to where Turner stood. Ashley followed closely, ready to support him if needed. "Professor Turner," Jimmy said quietly, "there's something else you should know. Something I've never told anyone." Turner looked up, his academic armor cracked but not completely broken. "What?" "Your father saved my life before I carried him. When the first mortars hit, I was exposed. He pulled me into cover, took shrapnel that would have killed me." Jimmy's voice was steady now, as if unburdening himself of this final truth had strengthened him. "If he hadn't done that, neither of us would be here having this conversation." Turner stared at him, speechless. "I've been living on borrowed time since that night," Jimmy continued. "Time your father gave me. I didn't deserve it then. Not sure I deserve it now, but I've tried to honor it by living as best I could." "Living?" Turner found his voice. "Is that what you call hiding in that trailer? Being the town eccentric?" Jimmy didn't rise to the bait. "We all carry our war differently, son. Some hide it better than others." Before Turner could respond, Jimmy swayed alarmingly. Ashley rushed forward just as his knees buckled. Together with Turner, she managed to ease Jimmy into a chair. "I'm calling an ambulance," she said, already pulling out her phone. "No ambulance," Jimmy protested weakly. "Just need to rest a minute." But his skin was hot to the touch, his breathing labored. The infection that doctors had thought contained was clearly resurging. "This isn't a debate," Ashley said firmly, dialing 911. "Professor Turner, can you stay with him while I direct the paramedics?" Turner nodded, still processing Jimmy's revelation about his father. As Ashley stepped away to make the call, he found himself alone with the man he had spent decades vilifying. "Why didn't you tell anyone this before?" he asked quietly. "About my father saving you?" Jimmy's eyes, bright with fever, fixed on Turner. "Some gifts you can't repay. Some debts mark you forever." He paused, gathering strength. "Your father died a hero, son. Not because of how he died, but because of how he lived, putting others before himself, right to the end." Turner's academic detachment finally crumbled entirely. The historian gave way to the fatherless boy who had constructed a lifetime of research around a single, devastating absence. "I wanted someone to blame," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "It was easier than accepting that his death meant nothing." "It meant everything to me," Jimmy replied, "and to the men who made it home that night because your father called in our position before the radio was hit." The ambulance arrived within minutes. As the paramedics loaded Jimmy onto a stretcher, Turner stood back, his carefully constructed narrative in shambles. The blog post that had gone viral, the years of research, the certainty of abandonment and cowardice, all now called into question by the words of a dying door gunner and the unshakable calm of a man who had nothing left to lose by lying, yet insisted on a truth that exonerated himself not at all. As they wheeled Jimmy toward the exit, he reached out and grasped Turner's sleeve with surprising strength. "Your father's picture," Jimmy said urgently. "Keep it. It belongs with family." Turner took the worn photograph, his hand trembling slightly. "I'll come to the hospital." "We're not finished." Jimmy managed a weak nod before the paramedics whisked him away, leaving Turner standing alone in the empty auditorium, holding a photograph that connected him to a father he had never known, and to a truth he was only beginning to understand. The acrid smell of smoke roused Jimmy from a fitful sleep. For a moment, disoriented by fever and medication, he thought he was back in the jungle. Burning villages, napalm, the constant reek of destruction. Then reality reasserted itself. He was in his hospital room, and something was actually burning. He fumbled for the call button with his left hand, but before he could press it, Ashley Reeves burst through the door, her uniform disheveled, her face taut with distress. "Mr. Winters, I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. Jimmy struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing shoulder. "What's happened?" Ashley's professional composure cracked slightly. "There's been a fire. At your trailer." The words hung in the air between them, their full implications slowly penetrating Jimmy's fever-fogged mind. "How bad?" he finally asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil the news unleashed. "It's gone." By the time the fire department arrived, there wasn't much they could do. Ashley hesitated, clearly wrestling with how much to share. "They're investigating the cause, but they think someone said it," Jimmy finished for her. "Because of the blog post. Because half the town now thinks I'm a coward who left men to die." Ashley didn't deny it. "There were spray-painted words on your shed. Traitor and other things." Jimmy closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this latest blow with the same stoic resignation that had carried him through decades of ostracism and pain. When he opened them again, they were clear and focused. Was anyone hurt? No, the surrounding trailers were evacuated in time. Jimmy nodded, as if this was the only information that mattered. "My things?" The question was delivered so matter-of-factly that Ashley felt a fresh wave of guilt and sadness. A man's entire life had been reduced to ashes, and he asked about it as casually as someone inquiring about misplaced keys. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "The fire chief said it burned hot and fast. They found some metal objects, your medals, maybe some tools, but most everything else is gone." Jimmy's left hand clenched the thin hospital blanket, the only outward sign of distress. "My box, under the bed. Did they—" "I don't know," Ashley interrupted gently. "But I'll personally go through whatever they recovered." A nurse appeared in the doorway, frowning at the unexpected visitor. "Officer Reeves, Mr. Winters needs rest. His infection has worsened and Dr. Roberts is concerned about possible sepsis." Ashley nodded, reluctantly preparing to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow. We'll figure this out, Mr. Winters, I promise." As she turned to go, Jimmy's voice stopped her. Weaker now, the brief surge of adrenaline fading. "Ashley, thank you for telling me yourself." It was the first time he had used her first name, and something in his tone, a resignation that bordered on finality, sent a chill through her. Outside in the corridor, Ashley found Dr. Roberts reviewing charts at the nurses' station. "How is he really?" she asked without preliminaries. The doctor sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "The infection is proving resistant to our first-line antibiotics. We've switched to a more aggressive regimen, but at his age, with his overall health status—" He let the sentence trail off, its conclusion obvious. "Is he going to die?" Ashley's bluntness surprised even herself. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Roberts replied diplomatically. "But the next 48 hours will be critical. The stress of his recent surgery, the emotional toll of recent events, None of it helps his immune system fight this infection. Ashley nodded, processing this information. I just told him his home burned down. Dr. Roberts winced. Not ideal timing, but he needed to know. He hesitated, then added, He's been through worse and survived. I wouldn't count him out yet. News of the fire spread through Millfield like a contagion, transmuting as it traveled. By morning, 3 distinct narratives had emerged: that Jimmy was the victim of targeted harassment, that drug users from the nearby trailer park had accidentally started the blaze, or most troublingly, that Jimmy himself had orchestrated it for sympathy or insurance money. The Millfield Gazette's front page featured a photo of the charred remains of Jimmy's trailer, with the headline, Local Hero Loses Everything in Suspicious Blaze. Sarah Williams' article carefully avoided speculation about the cause, but noted the timing, just hours after the confrontation at the community college. At the police station, Chief Grant Davidson called Ashley into his office, his expression grave beneath his bushy gray mustache. Reeves, we need to talk about your involvement with the Winters situation. Ashley stood at parade rest before his desk, sensing a reprimand coming. Sir, you've been spending an awful lot of off-duty time on this, visiting the hospital, arranging that meeting at the college, digging into military records. With respect, Chief, the man saved my life. Davidson leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. And you've shown appropriate gratitude. But this is becoming a community issue now, with political implications. Political implications? Ashley couldn't keep the edge from her voice. A decorated veteran lost everything he owned, possibly to arson. A veteran with a controversial history, Davidson corrected. Mayor Stevens called this morning. The town council is concerned about perceptions. Half the VFW post is up in arms demanding justice for Winters. The other half thinks he's been lying for decades. So we're supposed to what? Look the other way? We're supposed to investigate objectively, Davidson replied sharply, which becomes difficult when one of my officers is personally involved with the victim. I'm not personally involved, Ashley protested. I'm trying to help someone who has no one else. Davidson's expression softened slightly. I understand your feelings, Reeves. I do. But you need to maintain professional distance here. The fire investigation will proceed by the book. If it was arson, we'll find who did it. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you're on regular duty. Not unofficial historian for Jimmy Winters. Davidson picked up a file from his desk, signaling the end of the conversation. We have other cases that need attention. Dismissed. Ashley left the chief's office, seething with frustration. In the squad room, she found several officers gathered around a computer, watching something that prompted uncomfortable laughter. What's going on? She asked, approaching the group. Officer Pete Lawson quickly minimized the window, but not before Ashley caught a glimpse of what appeared to be Michael Turner's blog. Nothing important, Lawson mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Let me see it, Ashley demanded. Reluctantly, Lawson restored the window. The blog had been updated with a new post titled The Confrontation, Turner versus Winters. Someone had recorded the entire exchange at the community college and uploaded it. The comment section was a battlefield of partisan opinions, with many viewers mocking Jimmy's appearance and questioning his mental stability. You find this entertaining? Ashley asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The group shifted uncomfortably. Just checking out the latest town drama, Lawson offered lamely. That drama involves a man who's fighting for his life right now. A man who saved my life. Ashley's gaze swept the assembled officers. A man who deserves better than this from the people sworn to protect and serve this community. Without waiting for a response, she returned to her desk and buried herself in paperwork, trying to focus on routine police matters while her mind continually circled back to Jimmy, alone in his hospital room, having lost the few physical possessions that had anchored him to the world. By mid-afternoon, the first complication arose. Jimmy suffered a minor stroke, a blood clot likely triggered by the infection and inflammation. Though quickly treated, it left him with slightly slurred speech and increased weakness on his already compromised right side. When Ashley visited after her shift, she found him conscious but subdued, his weathered face now appearing almost translucent against the white hospital pillows. "The doctor says you had a setback," she said, taking the chair beside his bed. Jimmy attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Had worse in basic training." Despite his brave front, Ashley could see the deterioration in his condition. The infection and subsequent stroke had depleted his already limited reserves. The indomitable spirit that had propelled him through the jungle carrying a wounded comrade now struggled to keep his eyes open. "I talked to the fire investigators," she said, trying to keep her tone conversational. "They recovered a metal box from under where your bed would have been. It was damaged, but still intact." Jimmy's eyes sharpened momentarily. "Did you open it?" "Not yet. I wanted to ask you first." He seemed to weigh something in his mind before responding. "The key is on my dog tag chain, in the drawer there." He nodded toward the bedside table. Ashley retrieved the chain and found a small key among the military identification tags. "Are you sure you want me to open it? I can just bring it here." "Won't make it here in time," Jimmy said with brutal self-awareness. "Better you look now." The finality in his tone sent a chill through her. "Don't talk like that. You're going to beat this." Jimmy didn't argue, but his expression made it clear he'd made his peace with what was coming. "The box, Ashley. Please." She promised to return the next day with whatever she found, then left him to rest. In the hospital corridor, she encountered Michael Turner, hesitating outside Jimmy's room with a bouquet of flowers, an incongruously cheerful splash of color in the sterile environment. "Professor Turner," she acknowledged, surprised by his presence. Turner shifted uncomfortably. "Officer Reeves, I heard about the fire and his stroke. Come to gloat?" The words escaped before Ashley could censor them. Turner flinched as if slapped. "No, I came to—" He trailed off, seemingly unsure himself of his purpose. "To what? Finish destroying what's left of his reputation while he's too weak to defend himself?" "That's not fair," Turner protested, though without much conviction. "I've spent the last 24 hours questioning everything I thought I knew. That door gunner, Martinez, his account matches details in military reports I've seen. Details Winters couldn't have known if he wasn't there." Ashley's anger softened slightly. "So, you believe him now?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," Turner admitted. "But I know my father wouldn't want me to hound a dying man." Before Ashley could respond, a code blue alarm sounded from Jimmy's room. Medical personnel rushed past them, pushing emergency equipment. Ashley and Turner pressed themselves against the wall as doctors and nurses swarmed into the room. "What's happening?" Turner asked, his academic detachment completely gone. "His heart," Ashley said numbly, watching the controlled chaos through the doorway. The infection must have reached his heart. For 20 agonizing minutes they stood in silence as the medical team worked to stabilize Jimmy. Finally, Dr. Roberts emerged, his scrubs damp with sweat. "We've got him back," he said without preamble, "but he's very weak. The infection has caused endocarditis, inflammation of the heart lining. We're transferring him to ICU." "Will he recover?" Ashley asked. Dr. Roberts's expression was grave. "The next 12 hours are critical. I've started him on the strongest antibiotics we have, but his system is overwhelmed. His body has been fighting for a very long time, not just this infection." "Can we see him?" Turner asked unexpectedly. "Briefly, once he's settled in ICU. Family only after that." The doctor glanced between them. "Is there any actual family we should contact?" Ashley and Turner exchanged looks. "No," Ashley answered. "No family." As Dr. Roberts left to oversee Jimmy's transfer, Turner turned to Ashley. "I never thought it would come to this. My blog was supposed to be academic, a historical investigation, not a witch hunt. What did you expect would happen?" Ashley's voice held no accusation now, only weary sadness. "You publicly accused a decorated combat veteran of cowardice and abandoning his comrades." "I believed it was the truth," Turner said defensively. "Everything I found pointed to it." "Maybe you found what you were looking for," Ashley suggested quietly. "We all have our narratives, Professor. The stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world. Sometimes we protect those narratives at the expense of the truth." Turner had no response to this. He stared at the flowers in his hand, their cheerfulness now seeming almost obscene against the backdrop of Jimmy's struggle for life. "I need to get something from the station," Ashley said finally. "The box they recovered from his trailer. He wants me to open it." "Can I come with you?" Turner asked suddenly. "I feel like I need to see this through, whatever this is." Ashley considered refusing, but recognized the genuine conflict in Turner's expression. "Fine, but whatever we find, you don't publish it without his permission. If he recovers." "When he recovers," Turner corrected softly. Together they left the hospital, two strangers united only by their connection to a man who had carried the weight of an unimaginable night for 57 years, a man who now fought his final battle alone, as he had fought so many before. The metal box sat between them on Ashley's kitchen table, its surface scarred by heat and smoke. Despite the fire's intensity, it remained largely intact, a testament to military-grade craftsmanship. The key, retrieved from Jimmy's dog tags, was small and tarnished with age. "Should we be doing this?" Turner asked, his academic certainty replaced by genuine ethical doubt. "It feels invasive." Ashley turned the key in her fingers. "He specifically asked me to open it. Said he wouldn't make it here in time." "Still morbid," Turner muttered. But he leaned forward as Ashley inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism yielded with surprising ease. Inside, protected from the fire's ravages, lay the carefully preserved artifacts of Jimmy Winter's life. Not the mundane possessions that had filled his trailer, but the essential touchstones that had defined his existence. On top was a folded American flag in the traditional triangle, slightly yellowed with age. Ashley lifted it reverently. "His mother's funeral flag," she guessed. "The fire chief said they found military medals fused to the trailer floor. These must have been too important to keep out." Beneath the flag lay a stack of letters bound with faded ribbon, correspondence from home during his deployment. The paper had grown brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible. Ashley set them aside without reading, respecting that privacy at least. Next came a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. Turner reached for it instinctively, the historian in him recognizing its potential significance, then pulled back. "We shouldn't read that without permission," he said. Ashley nodded, placing it with the letters. "We'll just catalog what's here, not pry into the contents." The bottom layer of the box held the most surprising items: a Purple Heart medal still in its presentation case, a faded black-and-white photograph of young Marines posing before deployment, their faces unmarked by war, and most significantly, a yellowed document protected in a plastic sleeve. Turner gasped as he recognized the letterhead. "That's a Medal of Honor citation draft, incomplete but unmistakable." Ashley carefully removed the document. The text described actions on Hill 471 near Khe Sanh on February 25, 1968. The recommendation, signed by Captain William Foster, detailed how Corporal James Winters had assumed command after all officers were killed organized a defensive position under intense enemy fire, and personally carried wounded Marines to safety, including Corporal David Turner, who subsequently died of his wounds. "This validates everything he told us," Ashley said softly, "but it's incomplete." "Never processed." Turner's hands trembled slightly as he examined the document. "The signature date is March 3, 1968, a week after the ambush. My father had been dead for days." "The chaos of war," Ashley suggested. "Paperwork gets lost, especially during Tet." Turner shook his head in disbelief. "All these years I blamed him, built my career around disproving his heroism, and all along there was this." Before Ashley could respond, her phone rang. The hospital. She answered immediately, her expression tightening as she listened. "We'll be right there," she said finally, ending the call. "Jimmy's regained consciousness. Dr. Roberts says if we want to talk to him, we should come now." They carefully returned everything to the box except the Medal of Honor recommendation, which Ashley slipped into a document protector. The drive to County General passed in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had discovered and its implications. The ICU was hushed, the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft whir of ventilators creating a mechanical lullaby for the critically ill. Jimmy had been moved to a private room, a small concession to the dignity of a man who might be spending his final hours there. Dr. Roberts met them outside the door. "He's lucid but extremely weak. The antibiotics are fighting the infection, but his heart has sustained damage. Keep it brief." Inside, Jimmy lay propped against white pillows, an oxygen cannula in his nostrils and IV lines snaking from both arms. His skin had a grayish cast, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once surveyed jungles for hidden enemies, remained alert and focused. "You found it," he said without preamble, his voice barely audible above the monitor's steady beeping. Ashley nodded, pulling a chair close to his bedside. Turner hung back, unsure of his welcome. "We found everything, Jimmy." "The flag, the letters, the journal." She hesitated, then withdrew the plastic sleeve. "And this." Jimmy's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the Medal of Honor recommendation. "Thought that burned with the C-130 evacuation plane. Captain Foster must have filed a copy." "You knew about this?" Turner asked, stepping forward. Jimmy's gaze shifted to him. "Foster told me he was putting me in for it. Never believed it would go through. Too many heroes in Quezon, too much confusion during Tet. But you never mentioned it. Not once in all these years." A ghost of a smile touched Jimmy's pale lips. "What was I going to say? Hey folks, I was almost awarded a Medal of Honor. Medals don't make the man. Actions do." Ashley gently placed the document on the bed within Jimmy's reach. "This changes everything. It corroborates your account of that night, about carrying Turner's father." Jimmy didn't touch the paper. "Doesn't change that David died. Doesn't bring him back." His eyes found Turner's. "Doesn't give you a father." Turner moved closer to the bed, his academic armor completely dissolved. "Mr. Winters, Jimmy, I've spent my life researching that night, interpreting fragments of reports, interviews with traumatized survivors. I built a narrative that made sense of my father's death." He swallowed hard. "I needed someone to blame." "War's the only thing to blame," Jimmy replied. "War and bad luck. Your father was a good Marine, saved my life before I tried to save his." The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Jimmy's eyes drifted to the window where afternoon sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds. "There's someone else who can verify my story," he said finally, his voice stronger. "Lieutenant Prescott didn't die in the ambush like I thought. He was evacuated with severe head wounds. Last I heard, he was in a VA facility in Michigan." Turner stared in disbelief. "Benjamin Prescott is alive." but every report listed him as KIA. Military bureaucracy, Jimmy shrugged slightly. Reports get filed before facts are clear. Found out he survived when I ran into our platoon sergeant at a VA hospital in '86. Prescott had brain damage, couldn't speak for years. But the sergeant said he'd started communicating again. Ashley was already typing on her phone. Benjamin Prescott, Michigan VA Facilities. She looked up triumphantly. Got him. He's at the VA Medical Center in Ann Arbor. Been there since 1975. Jimmy nodded weakly. He was there, in command. If anyone can set the record straight, it's him. Turner seemed overwhelmed by this revelation. All these years, I never even considered he might be alive. Most weren't, Jimmy said simply. A nurse entered to check Jimmy's vitals, frowning at the number of visitors and the clear signs of fatigue in her patient. You need to wrap this up, Mr. Winters needs rest. As Ashley and Turner prepared to leave, Jimmy's hand shot out with surprising strength, grasping Turner's wrist. Your father's last words, he said urgently. He said, make it count, not just tell my son I did my duty. He said, make it count, Jimmy. I've been trying to ever since. Turner's composure finally broke. Tears welled in his eyes as 50 years of misplaced anger and grief found a new channel. I'm sorry, he whispered. For the blog, for everything. Jimmy released his grip. No apologies needed. You were protecting your father's memory. Can't fault a son for that. After promising to return the next day, Ashley and Turner left the hospital. In the parking lot, Turner turned to her, his academic demeanor completely transformed. I need to go to Ann Arbor. Today. If Lieutenant Prescott is alive and lucid, his testimony could change everything. Ashley nodded. I'll call the Ann Arbor VA, make sure they'll let you see him. Will you come with me? Turner asked unexpectedly. I'm not sure I can do this alone. Before Ashley could answer, her phone rang again. The station. Chief Davidson's voice was terse. Reeves, we have a development in the Winters fire investigation. Security camera from the gas station across from the trailer park caught someone suspicious entering the area shortly before the fire started. I need you back here. On my way, she responded, ending the call. To Turner, she said, go to Ann Arbor. Find Prescott. I need to follow up on the arson investigation. I'll call you as soon as I learn anything, Turner promised. They parted ways, each pursuing a different thread of the same tapestry, a complex pattern of truth and memory that had begun unraveling the night Jimmy Winters saved Ashley Reeves's life. Back at the station, Chief Davidson led Ashley to the small conference room where they had set up the investigation board. On the monitor, frozen from security footage, was the grainy image of a man approaching the trailer park, a gas can in hand. We got lucky, Davidson said. Camera caught him clear enough for facial recognition. Frank Reynolds. Ashley stared in disbelief. Frank Reynolds? The hardware store owner? Town council member? Davidson nodded grimly. The same Frank who's been most vocal about postponing any recognition for Winters. The same Frank who argued against naming the new Veterans Park section after Vietnam vets. But why would he burn down Jimmy's trailer? That's extreme even for small-town politics. Davidson handed her a folder. Because of this. Frank's father was Gordon Reynolds, who served as a Marine Corps paymaster during Vietnam. In 1968, there was an investigation into missing combat pay for troops at Khe Sanh. Over $50,000 never reached the Marines on the front lines. Ashley scanned the documents, understanding dawning. And Jimmy knew about this? Jimmy filed a complaint when he returned stateside. It never went anywhere. bigger scandals to deal with, and one angry grunt didn't have the pull to make waves, but the investigation documents were in his military file, which Turner would have found during his research, Ashley realized, and might have published eventually. Frank couldn't risk that connection coming to light. His father used that money to start the hardware store after his discharge. The Reynolds family business, the cornerstone of Frank's standing in this community, was built on stolen combat pay from men who were fighting and dying at Khe Sanh. Ashley felt her hands clench into fists. "We're arresting him?" "Judge Harmon signed the warrant 20 minutes ago. Teams picking him up now." The pieces were falling into place with dizzying speed. Frank Reynolds's determined opposition to Jimmy, his quick embrace of Turner's allegations, his push to delay any recognition, all attempts to discredit a man who, however unwittingly, posed a threat to his family's reputation and legacy. By evening, word of Frank's arrest had spread throughout Millfield. The town, already divided over Jimmy Winters, now faced a new schism. Those who believed a respected business owner could commit such a crime versus those who saw it as belated justice for a forgotten veteran. At the hospital, Jimmy's condition stabilized slightly. The powerful antibiotics had begun to overcome the infection, though the damage to his heart remained a serious concern. He slept through most of the day, unaware of the dramatic developments his story had unleashed. In Ann Arbor, Michigan, Michael Turner sat beside the bed of retired Lieutenant Benjamin Prescott, now 81 years old and partially paralyzed from his Vietnam head wound. Though limited in speech, Prescott could communicate by typing on a specialized keyboard. His memory of February 25, 1968 remained crystal clear, one perfect, terrible night preserved in amber while more recent memories faded. Turner read his account with growing amazement. Prescott had not died in the initial ambush as reported, but had been critically wounded. Before losing consciousness, he had ordered Jimmy to take command of the remaining men. His last memory was of Jimmy organizing a defensive perimeter, moving with calm efficiency under intense enemy fire. "Winters, save those who could be saved," Prescott typed laboriously. "Your father beyond help. Jimmy refused to leave him. Ordered others to extraction point." Turner photographed the typed testimony with shaking hands, then placed a call to Ashley. "Prescott confirms everything," he said without preamble when she answered. "Jimmy told the truth all along. And there's more. The Medal of Honor recommendation wasn't lost. It was deliberately buried." "What? Why?" "Politics," Turner spat the word. "Prescott says there was pressure from above to limit high-profile awards during that period. Too many questions about why we were at Khe Sanh to begin with. A Medal of Honor meant congressional attention, media coverage, exactly what the brass wanted to avoid during the Tet fallout." Ashley absorbed this information, adding it to what she had learned about Frank Reynolds. "It's all connected," she said finally. "The missing pay investigation, the suppressed medal recommendation, different threads of the same cover-up." "I'm driving back tonight," Turner said. "This needs to be made right, all of it." When Ashley returned to the hospital that evening, she found Jimmy awake and more alert than before. Some color had returned to his face, though he remained critically ill. "They arrested Frank Reynolds for the fire," she told him, settling into the bedside chair. "Did you know about his father, the missing combat pay?" Jimmy nodded slightly. "Suspected. Never had proof. We all knew our pay was being skimmed, but we had bigger problems at Khe Sanh than missing dollars. Turner found Lieutenant Prescott," she continued. "He confirmed your account of that night. Everything you said was true." A ghost of a smile touched Jimmy's lips. "Nice to be believed. After all this time." Ashley leaned forward, taking his hand gently. "The VFW Post is organizing a ceremony. The Pentagon has been contacted about the Medal of Honor recommendation. Turner is retracting his blog posts, publishing the truth instead. Jimmy closed his eyes briefly. Don't need medals, don't need ceremonies. Just wanted the truth known before I checked out. You're not checking out, Ashley said firmly. Dr. Roberts says the infection is responding to treatment. Your fever's down. Heart's shot, Jimmy replied matter-of-factly. Been running on borrowed time since '68 anyway. Ashley squeezed his hand. The town's raising money to rebuild your home. And not that trailer, a real house on Walter Jenkins' land. He's donating the plot. For the first time, Jimmy seemed genuinely surprised. Why would they do that? Been the town crazy for 50 years. Because people know the truth now. And truth has power, Jimmy. Even after all this time. As darkness fell outside the hospital window, Jimmy Winters allowed himself to consider, for the first time in decades, the possibility of a future. One where he was not defined by whispers and averted gazes, but by the truth of who he had been and what he had done on a jungle hillside half a world away and half a century ago. The borrowed time that David Turner had given him might, at long last, be his own. Spring had come to Millfield, Indiana, painting the small town in tentative shades of green and yellow. On the newly dedicated Veterans Memorial Park, cherry trees donated by the Garden Club had burst into pink blossoms, their petals occasionally drifting down to rest on the polished granite markers that now lined the central pathway. Jimmy Winters sat on a bench beneath the largest cherry tree, his cane resting against his knee, watching a group of children playing nearby. At 71, he looked older than his years, a lifetime of hardship etched into his weathered face. But there was something different about him now. The perpetual tension that had kept his shoulders hunched and his gaze wary had eased, replaced by a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. 3 years had passed since the fire, the hospital, the revelations. 3 years of profound change for Jimmy and for Millfield itself. "Sorry I'm late," Ashley Reeves called as she approached the bench, no longer in uniform but wearing the badge and sidearm of her new role as detective. "Paperwork never ends, even with a promotion." Jimmy smiled, a genuine expression that had once been foreign to his face but now came more naturally. "No rush. Got nowhere to be but here." Ashley settled beside him, watching the children play. "The school group will be here in about 20 minutes. You ready for this?" "Guess so," Jimmy replied, though a hint of his old reticence surfaced. "Still don't know what to tell kids about war." "Tell them the truth," Ashley said simply. "That's all you've ever needed to do." The truth had indeed been Jimmy's salvation. The Medal of Honor that had been denied him for political expediency in 1968 had finally been awarded in a White House ceremony 18 months earlier. President Harris had placed the medal around Jimmy's neck, calling him a testament to the enduring courage of American veterans and the healing power of delayed justice. Michael Turner had stood at Jimmy's side during that ceremony, their unlikely friendship forged in the crucible of shared grief and mutual understanding. Turner's retraction of his accusations and subsequent book, Borrowed Time, The True Story of Quezon's Forgotten Hero, had become a bestseller, chronicling not only Jimmy's actions during the war, but the systematic failures that had buried his heroism for 5 decades. "Turner called this morning," Jimmy said, adjusting his position to ease the persistent ache in his shoulder. "Book's going into its 3rd printing. Wants to know if I'll do some more interviews." Ashley smiled. "Will you?" "Told him I've said all I need to say." Jimmy nodded toward the children. "Rather spend time with them now." Future's more important than the past. The modest house visible on the hill overlooking the park stood as another testament to change. Built on land donated by local farmer Walter Jenkins, the single-story home had been constructed through a combination of community donations, veteran support organizations, and proceeds from Turner's book. Its wide doorways accommodated the wheelchair Jimmy occasionally needed on his bad days, and its large front porch offered a view of the town that had once shunned him, but now claimed him as their most distinguished citizen. "Frank Reynolds gets out next month," Ashley said, watching Jimmy carefully for his reaction. Jimmy nodded, unsurprised. "Time served plus good behavior. Figured it would be soon." "Are you okay with that, after what he did?" Jimmy considered the question with the deliberate thoughtfulness that characterized him now. "Man made a mistake protecting his father's reputation." "I understand that better than most." He tapped his cane lightly against the ground. "Besides, losing the store and his standing hurt Frank more than jail ever could." The Reynolds hardware store had indeed closed after Frank's conviction for arson, the family's century-long business legacy ending in disgrace. The building now housed a veteran support center where Jimmy volunteered 3 days a week, helping younger veterans navigate the bureaucratic maze he had once found so impenetrable. "You're a better man than most," Ashley observed, not for the first time. "Nah. Just old enough to know grudges take more energy than forgiveness." Jimmy's eyes crinkled at the corners. "And at my age, energy's a limited resource." Despite his self-deprecating humor, Jimmy's health had stabilized after his near-death experience. The damaged heart would never be strong, and the paralyzed arm would never regain function, but regular medical care and proper nutrition had given him a quality of life he hadn't experienced in decades. The deep-seated infection that had nearly killed him had been fully eradicated, though it had left its mark in the form of a weakened heart that required ongoing medication. The sound of a school bus pulling into the nearby parking lot drew their attention. Fifth graders from Millfield Elementary spilled out, their excited chatter carrying across the park. "That's my cue," Jimmy said, using his cane to push himself to his feet. "Show time." Ashley stood with him, automatically offering a supportive arm that he accepted without the pride that would once have made such help impossible. "Remember, just speak from the heart. That's all they need." Jimmy nodded, making his way toward the central monument where the children were gathering. The granite obelisk, dedicated to all Millfield veterans but with special recognition of those who served in Vietnam, had been the town's way of making amends, not just to Jimmy, but to all the young men who had returned to indifference or hostility. The children quieted as Jimmy approached, their teacher having prepared them for this meeting with the local hero. Among them stood a boy with serious eyes and close-cropped hair, Michael Turner's son, David, named for the grandfather he would never meet, but whose story he knew well. "Good morning," Jimmy said, his voice still carrying the raspy quality that decades of smoking had etched into his vocal cords before he'd finally quit. "I'm James Winters. Most folks just call me Jimmy." A little girl in the front raised her hand immediately. "Are you the one who got the Medal of Honor? We saw your picture in our history book." Jimmy smiled, easing himself onto the stone bench facing the children. "That's me, though the medal came long after the actions it recognized." "Were you scared in the war?" a boy asked, his directness unsoftened by adult tact. "Every day," Jimmy answered honestly. "Anyone who says they weren't scared in combat is either lying or doesn't remember it right. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs doing despite the fear." Another hand shot up. "Is it true you carried a wounded soldier for miles through the jungle?" Jimmy's eyes found young David Turner in the group. "I did. His name was Corporal David Turner. He was my friend, and he saved my life before I tried to save his." The old pain flickered across his face. "I couldn't save him in the end, but I made sure he didn't die alone." For the next half hour, Jimmy answered the children's questions with a gentle honesty that neither glorified war nor shied away from its realities. He spoke of brotherhood and sacrifice, of fear and courage, of the long journey home that for some veterans never truly ended. "The most important thing to remember," he said as the session wound down, "is that when you see a veteran, especially an older one like me, you're looking at someone who gave a piece of themselves for something bigger. Some gave limbs, some gave peace of mind, some gave their future. But each one gave something that can't be returned." As the children thanked him and began moving toward their next activity, young David Turner lingered behind. When the others had moved out of earshot, he approached Jimmy with the solemn gravity that reminded Jimmy so much of Michael. "My dad wanted me to give you this," the boy said, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "He said it belongs with you now." Jimmy accepted the package, already guessing its contents from the weight and shape. Carefully unwrapping it, he revealed the framed photograph of David Turner's pregnant wife, the same photo Jimmy had carried out of the jungle and tried to return after the war. "Your grandfather gave this to me for safekeeping the night before our patrol," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. "Said it was bad luck to carry pictures into combat." David nodded solemnly. "Dad said you kept it safe all these years, but now that we know the truth, it should come home to you." Jimmy ran his thumb over the frame, memories washing over him like waves. "Thank you, son. I'll treasure it." As David rejoined his classmates, Ashley approached, having watched the exchange from a distance. "Everything okay?" Jimmy held up the photograph. "Michael returned this. Said it belongs with me now." Ashley smiled, understanding the significance. "Full circle." "Something like that," Jimmy agreed, carefully tucking the photo into his jacket pocket close to his heart. They walked slowly together toward the park exit, Jimmy's cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the paved path. The sound of children's laughter followed them, a counterpoint to the solemnity of the monuments they passed. "Coming to the VFW dinner tonight?" Ashley asked as they reached the street. "I hear they're making your favorite, meatloaf that tastes almost exactly like military rations." Jimmy chuckled, a sound that had once been rare but now came more easily. "Wouldn't miss it. Harold would never let me hear the end of it." Harold Gentry, still commanding the VFW post at 78, had become Jimmy's closest friend, their shared experiences in Vietnam creating a bond that needed few words but contained profound understanding. "Need a ride?" Ashley offered. Jimmy shook his head. "Walking does me good. Doctor's orders." They parted ways at the corner, Ashley heading back to the station and Jimmy making his slow but steady way toward home. As he walked, several townspeople greeted him by name, not as Crazy Jimmy, but as Mr. Winters or simply Jimmy. Each acknowledgement, each nod of respect served as a small measure of healing for wounds that had festered far longer than the shrapnel in his shoulder. At the edge of Veterans Memorial Park, a new elementary school playground was under construction, the James Winters Playground, according to the sign. Jimmy paused, leaning on his cane as he watched the workers setting support posts for swing sets. "Looking good, isn't it?" Walter Jenkins had approached without Jimmy noticing, a testament to how much more relaxed Jimmy had become. Once, no one could have gotten within 20 feet without triggering his hypervigilance. "Seems like a lot of fuss for an old grunt," Jimmy replied, though the pride in his eyes belied the modesty of his words. Walter clapped him gently on his good shoulder. "Kids need heroes, Jimmy. Real ones, not the kind they see in those superhero movies. Just did what needed doing, then and now. And that's exactly why you're the right kind of hero," Walter said simply. "See you at the dinner tonight?" Jimmy nodded, and they parted with the comfortable ease of men who had moved beyond the need for many words. Continuing his walk home, Jimmy passed the site where his trailer had once stood. The area had been transformed into additional housing for the expanding Veteran Support Program, with 6 small but dignified homes now occupying the space. Each housed a veteran working to reintegrate into civilian life, some from Iraq or Afghanistan, others from earlier conflicts, all finding in Millfield a community that had learned the hard way how to welcome its warriors home. As Jimmy climbed the gentle slope toward his house, he paused several times to rest, his hand pressed against his chest where the Medal of Honor lay in its case on his mantel at home. The medal itself meant less to him than what it represented, not just recognition of one night's courage, but the vindication of a lifetime spent carrying burdens both physical and invisible. From his porch, Jimmy could see most of Millfield spread out below, the town that had once been a place of exile and was now, improbably, home. As he eased himself into the rocking chair that Ashley had given him for his 70th birthday, he removed the photograph of David Turner's wife from his pocket. "Made it count, David," he whispered to the image and to the memory of his friend. "Best I could." The borrowed time given to him that night in the jungle had stretched into 57 years. Years of pain and isolation, yes, but also, finally, years of recognition, community, and peace. Jimmy Winters had carried Corporal David Turner through the darkness of Khe Sanh, and in turn, the memory of that act had carried Jimmy through the darkness of the decades that followed. As the afternoon sun warmed his face, Jimmy closed his eyes, feeling not the weight of the past, but the surprising lightness of having, at long last, set it down. The medal in his shoulder was gone. The truth had been unearthed. The medal had been awarded. But most importantly, Jimmy Winters had found his way home, not to Indiana, but to himself. And that, he reflected as he drifted into a peaceful doze, was worth every step of the long journey. Jimmy Winters' journey reminds us that it's never too late for truth and healing. After decades of being misunderstood and ostracized, this Vietnam veteran finally received the recognition he deserved, not just through a Medal of Honor, but through a community that learned to see the hero they had overlooked for 50 years. For those of us who have carried invisible wounds or unrecognized sacrifices, Jimmy's story offers hope that our truths matter and will eventually be heard. The borrowed time that Jimmy was given became, in the end, truly his own, filled with dignity, respect, and the peace that comes from being seen for who you really are. His journey from Crazy Jimmy to Mr. Winters reminds us that our later years can bring healing and vindication for the struggles of our past. Have you ever experienced a moment of recognition or appreciation that came later than it should have, but meant all the more because of the wait? Or perhaps you've reconnected with someone from your past and found healing in that reunion. Please share your stories of delayed but meaningful validation in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.